Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. It was supposed to be another Tuesday night on The Tonight Show. Lady Gaga had just finished promoting her latest album, the audience was still buzzing from her performance, and Jimmy was setting up his signature comedy bit. But then something happened that no producer, no writer, no one in that studio had scripted. Jimmy Fallon, the man who makes millions laugh every night, suddenly went completely silent. He looked out into the audience, and for the first time in his career, he forgot every line he was supposed to say. What happened in the next 10 minutes would redefine what it means to be human on live television. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it all began, with a voicemail that Lady Gaga received 3 weeks earlier, and a promise she thought she'd never be able to keep. But first, let me tell you about Rose. Rose Castellano was 89 years old and had been fighting stage 4 pancreatic cancer for 8 months. She lived alone in a small apartment in Queens, and her greatest joy in life was watching The Tonight Show every single night. Not for Jimmy, though she loved his energy. Not for the celebrities, though she enjoyed their stories. Rose watched religiously because she was waiting for one person to appear as a guest, Lady Gaga. You see, Rose had been a jazz singer in the 1950s. She'd performed in small clubs throughout New York, never made it big, but she had a voice that could stop traffic. Her granddaughter Maria often told her that she sounded just like Tony Bennett's female counterpart. Rose would always laugh and say, "Maybe in another lifetime, sweetheart." But Rose had one regret that had haunted her for 70 years. In 1954, she had been offered an audition with a major record label. The night before the audition, her father had a heart attack. She spent the next 3 years caring for him until he passed, and by then, the music industry had moved on. She never got another chance. When Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett released Love for Sale in 2021, Rose cried for 2 hours straight. Not because she was sad, but because hearing Gaga sing jazz reminded her of the dreams she'd never chased. Her granddaughter Maria recorded Rose singing along to every song on the album. Her voice, even at 88, was still pure magic. 3 weeks before this Tonight Show episode, Rose's condition took a turn for the worse. The doctors gave her maybe a month. Maria, desperate to give her grandmother one last moment of joy, did something that seemed impossible. She somehow got through to Lady Gaga's management team. The voicemail was simple. "Ms. Germanata, my grandmother Rose has been your biggest fan since you started singing jazz. She's dying, and all she wants is to hear you sing one more time." I know you'll never hear this, but I had to try. Lady Gaga did more than hear it. She called Maria back personally. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Now, back to that Tuesday night in Studio 6B. Lady Gaga had finished her interview segment, and Jimmy was transitioning into his games segment when he noticed something unusual. In the 4th row, there was an elderly woman in a wheelchair, accompanied by a younger woman who seemed nervous. The elderly woman kept staring at Lady Gaga with an intensity that cut through everything else in the room. Jimmy had developed an instinct over his years of hosting. He could read a room like a conductor reads music, and something about this moment felt different. During the commercial break, he walked over to the audience. "Excuse me," he said to Maria. "Is everything okay with your grandmother?" Maria's eyes filled with tears immediately. "Mr. Fallon, I'm so sorry, we weren't supposed to. Lady Gaga arranged for us to be here. My grandmother, she's—" Maria couldn't finish the sentence. Rose, summoning strength from somewhere deep inside, grabbed Jimmy's hand. Her voice was weak but clear. "Young man, I've been watching you for 15 years. You make me laugh when everything hurts. But tonight I get to hear an angel sing one more time." Jimmy felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't just another audience interaction. This was sacred. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. When they came back from commercial, instead of continuing with the planned segment, Jimmy did something unprecedented. He walked to center stage, looked directly into the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to change the show tonight." The audience fell silent. The band stopped setting up. Even Lady Gaga looked confused. "There's someone in our audience tonight," Jimmy continued, his voice beginning to shake, "who reminds us why we do what we do. Rose, would you please come up here?" The studio erupted in confusion and then understanding as Maria wheeled Rose toward the stage. Lady Gaga immediately stood up, understanding passing between her and Jimmy in a look that lasted less than a second but said everything. As Rose reached the stage area, Jimmy knelt down beside her wheelchair. "Rose, Lady Gaga tells me you have a beautiful voice." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "I used to sing, back when the world was different." Lady Gaga approached slowly, gracefully, and took Rose's other hand. "Rose, I heard your voicemail that Maria left. But I also heard the recording she made of you singing the way you look tonight. Rose, would you sing with me? Right here, right now?" But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Rose looked up at Lady Gaga, then at Jimmy, then out at the audience of 240 people who had gone completely silent. "I haven't sung in front of people in 70 years, she whispered. Lady Gaga smiled that smile that had comforted millions around the world. "Then it's time." Lady Gaga began humming the opening bars of La Vie en Rose, the song that had become her signature. But instead of singing, she nodded to Rose. And Rose began to sing. Her voice was thin, fragile, but it carried something that no amount of technical training can create: a lifetime of love, loss, and dreams deferred but never abandoned. Every person in that studio felt it in their bones. Jimmy's eyes filled with tears. The cameramen forgot they were working and just listened. Even the usually bustling crew backstage stopped everything they were doing. Lady Gaga joined in for the chorus, but she didn't overpower Rose's voice. She supported it, harmonized with it, made it stronger. It was the most beautiful duet in Tonight Show history, and it was completely improvised. When they finished, the silence lasted for 10 full seconds. Then Jimmy started clapping, slowly, and the entire studio joined in. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was applause for a moment that transcended television, transcended entertainment, and became something holy. Jimmy walked over to his desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a piece of paper, his personal letterhead. He wrote something on it, folded it, and handed it to Rose. "Rose," he said, his voice breaking, "this is a promise from me to you. Your voice will never be forgotten." The note simply read, "Rose Castellano sang on The Tonight Show on November 15th, 2024. She reminded us all what music really is. Jimmy Fallon. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." Rose passed away 12 days later, on November 27th, 2024. Maria called Jimmy personally to tell him. She said that Rose had listened to the recording of her Tonight Show performance every single day, and that she died smiling. At Rose's funeral, over 400 people attended. Most of them had never met her, but they had seen the video of her singing with Lady Gaga, which had been viewed over 50 million times. Lady Gaga sent a beautiful arrangement of roses with a note. "For the angel who reminded us all to sing." But here's what most people don't know: Jimmy Fallon had that piece of paper, his promise to Rose, framed and hung in his dressing room. Every night before he goes on stage, he looks at it and remembers why he does what he does. It's not about the jokes, the games, or even the celebrities. It's about the moments when we connect as human beings and remember what really matters. The Tonight Show received over 100,000 letters and emails in the weeks following Rose's appearance. Many were from elderly people who shared their own stories of dreams deferred, of talents they thought the world would never see. Jimmy read every single one. 6 months later, Jimmy started a new segment on his show called Voices. Once a month, he invites someone from the audience who has a story to tell, a song to sing, or a dream to share. It doesn't matter if they're professional performers or if they've never been on stage before. What matters is that they have something to say, and that the world needs to hear it. The first guest on Voices was a 92-year-old man from Detroit who had written a poem for his late wife every day for 60 years, but had never shared them with anyone. The second was a teenage girl who had composed a symphony in her head while battling leukemia. The third was a former factory worker who had learned to play violin at age 70. Each time, Jimmy does the same thing he did for Rose. He listens. He honors the moment. And he gives them a piece of paper with his personal promise that their voice matters. Because that's what Rose taught him, in those 10 minutes when a planned comedy show became something much more important. She taught him that every person carries music inside them, and sometimes all they need is someone willing to listen. The last thing Rose said to Jimmy that night, as Maria was wheeling her backstage, was, "Thank you for seeing me." Not for the opportunity to sing, not for the platform, but for seeing her as a person with a voice worth hearing. That's the real magic of what happened on The Tonight Show that November evening. It wasn't about a viral moment, or a heartwarming clip. It was about the moment when entertainment became connection, when a show became a sanctuary, and when an 89-year-old woman's voice reminded all of us why we need each other. Jimmy Fallon still has Rose's recording on his phone. Sometimes, late at night after a difficult show, he listens to her singing La Vie en Rose with Lady Gaga. And he remembers that the best moments in life aren't scripted. They're the ones where we stop performing and start being human. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after Rose's passing, something extraordinary happened that proves her impact reached far beyond that one night. Maria, Rose's granddaughter, received a call from a woman named Catherine in Phoenix, Arizona. Catherine had seen the video of Rose singing and recognized something familiar in her voice. After weeks of research, Catherine discovered something that would have brought Rose to tears. She and Rose were distant cousins, both descended from a family of Italian opera singers who had immigrated to America in the 1920s. Catherine's grandmother, Elena, had been Rose's cousin, and they had performed together as young girls in their family's neighborhood church. Elena had kept letters that Rose had written her in the 1950s, describing her dreams of singing professionally and her heartbreak over missing her big audition. When Jimmy learned about this connection, he did something that surprised everyone. He invited Catherine to appear on The Tonight Show, not as a publicity stunt, but to honor the invisible threads that connect us all. Catherine brought Elena's letters and read one of them aloud on air. In it, 25-year-old Rose had written, "Someday, Elena, I believe our voices will be heard. Maybe not in the way we planned, but somehow, somewhere, someone will listen." That night, Jimmy created a scholarship fund in Rose's name for elderly individuals who want to pursue artistic dreams they'd put aside. Within 6 months, the fund had received over $2 million in donations from viewers around the world. The first recipient was Harold Chin, a 78-year-old retired accountant from Portland who had always wanted to learn the piano. The second was Martha Williams, an 85-year-old former nurse who had written children's stories her entire life but never published them. Each recipient received not just financial support, but a chance to share their talent on The Tonight Show's Voices segment. But perhaps the most remarkable development came from Lady Gaga herself. Inspired by her encounter with Rose, she started visiting hospices and senior centers unannounced, not for publicity, but to sing with people who reminded her why music exists in the first place. She never speaks publicly about these visits, but the staff at dozens of facilities across the country know her simply as Stefani, the young woman who shows up with her guitar and asks residents to share their favorite songs. Jimmy keeps all of this quiet too. He learned from Rose that the most meaningful moments don't need spotlights. They need presence, attention, and the courage to see each other as more than our roles, our ages, or our circumstances. The piece of paper with his promise to Rose still hangs in his dressing room, but now it's accompanied by dozens of others, promises to Harold, to Martha, to every person who has stepped onto his stage through the Voices segment. Each piece of paper represents the same commitment. I see you, I hear you, your story matters. 5 years later, When Jimmy reflects on that November night, he doesn't remember it as the episode where he broke protocol, or went viral. He remembers it as the night he learned the difference between being an entertainer and being human. Rose taught him that the greatest gift we can give each other isn't laughter, applause, or even fame. It's the simple, revolutionary act of bearing witness to each other's dreams. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters too. Because in a world that often feels divided, sometimes a song sung with love is the thing that reminds us we're all in this together. And sometimes, if we're lucky enough to pay attention, we discover that the most extraordinary moments happen when we stop performing our lives and start living them.